So this episode we're going to be fitting the rear end of this Terrain Tamer suspension. We've got the rear springs, we've got shackles, we've got fixed pins, we've got both bushes to choose from, we've got the dampers to put on. We need to take measurements before and after, but first we've got to unload this next couple of weeks worth of firewood we've got in the tray. We're only going to have time to do the first part, which will do the rear end. First job's going to be to measure everything so we have reference points. We'll jot these sizes down. We've got the spot we measured to off the ground, and we've also got the bolt to bolt size on the rear shocks. So basically what I'm measuring is from the center of that bolt to the center of the bolt at the top. Now as you lift, you do run out of shock. And on the front shocks, and again, a size off the ground. So we've got this now as our marker to see where we're going to be at. We took all the air out of the airbags, so we'll start by jacking the car up, making it safe. So this is a little bit different to a sprung over vehicle where you can basically undo the U-bolt and the spring will still sit on top of the diff. But with the leaf under, we've got to support the chassis and we've got to support the actual diff housing. And then before we undo the U-bolts, we've got to support the leaf pack. Front tyres are chocked, so we don't get any forward or back movement. Next step, we're going to completely remove the rear shocks and we're going to loosen up the front and back shackle nuts. The U-bolts we keep till the last thing because obviously that's what's holding the pack in. That's why we've got the jacks under the bottom leaf, so you can see there the difference between leaf under and leaf over. You have to be a little bit more careful in this application. Now that we've taken all the pressure off, we can undo the fixed pin and then go ahead and undo the shackle. So the pack's out now. This is a time where before you take it away and forget which way you were doing it, is measure the center pin to one of the ends and write it down. Because when you put your new pack in, I haven't done it, but I have heard of people putting them the wrong way around and having to do them twice. So you can see here, for example's sake, here's the center pin and then your bushes line up. Now I've been mucking around with leaf springs a long time, so I don't necessarily have to do this. Generally the military wrap tells me it's the fixed pin, whereas the other side is the movable pin, the shackle side. Now what I want to make note of the 79 rears, there's only roughly 100mm difference between this center point and your two ends. So if you're doing it for the first time, it's excusable to get it wrong. But if you measure it, you save that mistake. See that top leaf, even just sitting there with no weight on it, it seems to have quite a gap between 1 and 2, both front and rear. So this is where I felt that we had the bend. It was on the front side of the rears, around 80mm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we've got the two load leaves. And with the parabolics, you can see the thickness difference, but we've got 3 and 1. And it's also around the 80mm. The U-bolts. Now U-bolts are going to be different. The Terrain Tamer ones are slightly longer, but the difference is the thread. There's a lot more thread. So you can use these with the high clearance plate, but you would have to cut the bottoms off, whereas these ones run out of thread pretty quick. So we'll be putting the new ones in. Next choice we've got to make is bushes. We've got the rubber ones and we've got the pro bushes. And by the way, the kids have bagged these as pencil cases. So my decision is the rubber bush. It always has been. For me, it offers the most cushioning. It allows flex. Now what you get when you do get the pro bushing is you do get grease. It's a molly. So Terrain Tamer, look at that, they got their name on their bushes. Obviously one person's not as easy as two. Now not lining up, what you do is you just adjust that rear shackle forward or back to help you line that hole up, and then obviously up and down by the jack. Then we can concentrate on completely getting those shackles in before we then line up that center pin to the housing. The other interesting thing too is the factory nut on this is a 19 and the aftermarket one here is a 22. Next step, we jack the base of the pack up. We'll get it up and have a look how close we are. I think it's pretty good. That's it, we got it. Now the airbag has come off the housing, so we're going to be stretching that. Now, when we fitted these airbags, Heisman's gave me the factory bracket. Now what that means is that's this bracket here suits airbags on stock suspension, so unlifted. Now the ones we had on previous vehicles, it's a bigger bracket. So I think I'm better off doing this now rather than stretching the bag. We'll dismantle this bracket and I'll get the other one. So you can see here, this is what we took off when the car was still quite new. They were the factory bump stops. But this is the much bigger bracket that brings the airbag down for the lifted spring. So these have seen a bit of work in their days, these have, but they'll get to run again. We'll clean, clean, clean. What's that you say? Oh, I hear you. It never ends, no. Modify one thing, you've got to re-modify what you've modified. The air fitting shouldn't have to come out of the bag. Sit the airbag down on the housing. It sits there where it's going to get U-bolted in anyway, and we'll get the bracket off. Enter the bigger bracket. Now it's not quite 2 inches taller, but it'll be at least 30 mil. So those U-bolts have to sit on the edge of that airbag. I'm thinking a 35 is going to fit under that easily now. With the job half done, I'm going to wash up, have some morning tea. Weather's turned out amazing. Gone from a beanie to sunnies and a hat. So we're going to get stuck into the second side. It's basically the exact same as what we just saw on the passenger side. We can push through it a bit quicker when we're not filming. Delivery for Team Bullets. Did hit a little pickle on the driver's side, so the diff wants to come back a little bit, about 5 mil. And then final job is to get the shocks on. So there's your difference in length. You get a 2-inch lift and you get a shock that's 2 inches longer. We've gained 80 mil, 80 and 85 mil respectively. Whoa! So we're heading out to Cartech Tyre and Auto. We're out in the M5 doing 90k an hour, and apart from actually feeling the rake because we haven't done the front, they feel comfortable. They really bring back good memories of when I had them in the grey car. So day 2 on the suspension, and we got some of this stuff done in the dark. We've lifted the car up as high as possible on the jack, and we've supported the chassis. The radius arms I've loosened off all the nuts and bolts so they can move freely. We've removed the shocks completely, and I've undone the rear of the sway bar. So what we've got to be careful of as we lower this diff now to free up these coils is tension here. We will need to loosen them off. These ABS lines are not cheap, so that is going to be able to drop as we need it to. So I'm used to changing coils by putting a high lift jack on a bull bar and lifting it as high as possible. But no bull bar, no high lift jack. So now the idea is to drop that jack, which drops the diff, nothing else holding it bar that jack. So these coils should get to a point where I'm able to lift them over and pull them out. So I've undone the diff breather and the bracket so we can get a little bit more out of these if they need to. So with no specific coil for the front of these 2.8s, the 4-cylinder, this on the right is the Terrain Tamer, 50 kilo with 20mm lift for a V8. So we're going to try this, but as you can see, I think that the factory Toyota one is actually taller on the ground. One good thing about that is that we don't have to drop it anymore to get it in, but I'm not sure it's going to lift it enough for the 35s. So what we're going to need to do now is to get our measurements is to put the tyre back on. It has lifted it a little bit, but not enough. Now that is a 20mm lift for a V8, and it's doing the same job on this 4-cylinder with that winch in. So a quick call out to the boys there at Don Kyatt. They've put aside a 50mm coil up to 100 kilo, which is probably the run-of-the-mill V8 ones that you'd put in. So we'll rip these coils out and we'll take the 300 for a spin. Don't tell Shell, she's in town today. A very enjoyable drive from Maroubra to Marsden Park in the 300. I missed the traffic, which was great. Did it in under an hour. Out with the old, and in with the new. What a mess! Spring compressors are going to have to come into play for this. I'm not going to get that in. So I'm putting this back together as if these coils are staying. So the reason earlier where I put the wheel on to get the measurements is that I was a bit sus that the coil being the same size as the factory one. So we putting in the brake lines, I've got the diff breather back in. So this here is the sway bar lift block. So where we've gone up, hoping to go up 50mm, this takes out a lot of the bind in the sway bar, keeps it parallel still. You can see there, that one's actually been fitted. So the kit comes with the block, which has got like a collared insert in it and longer bolts. Now I think our first test is a toe test. Nicholas has got a round of MX in Goulburn. So we'll put the 35s on, hook up the Jayco and see how this 1GD goes up the hills, pulling a couple of ton. I'm not sure if it was someone on one of our 300 videos or in fact this one, the 1GD videos, that asked the question about starter motors. If it was for the 1GD 2.8, it's on the passenger side and it's quite high, it's quite good, it's above the chassis. For all you VDJ owners, 200 series owners, the dreaded job of replacing your starter that's inside the V. I'm assuming the 1GDs have had this starter motor on the side here forever. So we'll bolt that shock in before we get the tyre on. Now with the Terrain Tamer shocks, they come with the rubber bushings and washers. They also come with the poly material. But how convenient that the company's thinking of both. So obviously we're going to go with the rubber. Another thing too, you see here how the rubber in diameter is smaller than that washer. When you tighten these nuts up, make sure that this rubber doesn't come out past the washer. The big reveal. Now the tape does not lie, as I have found out, being a carpenter for the last 36 years. All this work today, the final test is going to be by tape measure. How much did we gain? Now I think it was a great result. We gained 40mm in height. Now the rears stayed the same, even though the car did come up that 40 at the front. But we'll drive it for a couple hundred kilometers and we'll remeasure. But all in all, very happy. The Parabolics are going to do the job in the rear when we ask to tow. Only coming up the 40mm as well, it saves us a little bit of grief not having to do caster correct bushes, which may I add are in the kit. Really happy how it drove. It was soft over the bumps, but it was firm on the corners. Really comfortable. For the big test coming up, we'll hook up the Jayco, throw Nicholas's motorbike on the back, and we'll hit some of these hills with the 35s and 2 ton on the back. So that's going to conclude the installation video of the Terrain Tamer suspension kit. So I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, thanks for watching.